Good morning, everyone. My name is Lori Cohen. I am the CEO of ECPAT USA, and I am so delighted to welcome you today for our panel in advance of World Day of Tourism. We miss travel. In 2015, 10% of the world's gross domestic product came from tourism. By 2018, there were a record 1.4 billion travelers expanding their appreciation of other cultures as they enjoyed themselves and created jobs that sparked economic growth worldwide. COVID interrupted that expansion, and by 2020, the World Travel and Tourism Council estimates 58 to 78% of those jobs were lost. Yet, tourism has its dark side. It creates opportunities to sexually exploit vulnerable children. As far back as 2013, UNICEF estimated that as many as 2 million children each year were victims of child sex tourism, trafficking, pornography, prostitution, or sale of children, and that annual profit from this exploitation was $20 billion US. Now that is an estimate. It's difficult to know because this economy is underground, but clearly the problem is massive and sadly growing. Way back in 1990, a group of both religious and secular organizations in Thailand started a campaign to protect Asian children from child sex offenders with a focus on sex tourism. This group became ECPAT, now a global organization active in over 104 countries. As we begin to build back better, we recognize World Tourism Day, September 27th, as an opportunity to advocate and put in place better systems that ensure responsible tourism that enhances development, yet protects children. The United Nations has been a leader in promoting laws, programs, and policies through the adoption of legally binding international treaties that set out the rights of every child. We are pleased to welcome on video Dr. Najat Maalla, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children, to highlight some of the UN initiatives to protect children against trafficking for sexual exploitation.
Dear colleagues and friends, thank you very much for inviting me to this important panel today to commemorate World Tourism Day. As the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children, my role is to advocate for the elimination of all forms of violence against children, including sexual violence. The issue of sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism knows no borders. No country is untouched by this phenomenon, and no child is immune. The internet and information and communication technologies have modified and amplified the risks. We see additional challenges associated with the anonymity of perpetrators, private online travel and tourism arrangements, and the use of live streaming of the sexual abuse of children, sometimes followed by physical encounters sought by the offenders. Cryptocurrencies are increasingly being used to fund child sexual exploitation. I have worked on the sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism for many years. I know a great deal of work by many actors has gone into the progress made following the adoption of the optional protocol to the CRC on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. The collective achievements in this work include the Code, the Global Study on Sexual Exploitation of Children in Travel and Tourism, which is also aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Declaration and call for action of the 2018 International Summit on Child Protection in Travel and Tourism in Bogota and the UN World Tourism Organization Framework Convention on Tourism Ethics adopted in September 2019. But despite these commitments and action, the sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism is still underreported and under-prosecuted. Few child victims are identified, and many do not receive appropriate care and assistance until after their recovery. Many perpetrators, intermediaries, buyers, sellers, and traffickers are not prosecuted. The current COVID-19 crisis and restriction are affecting the modus operandi of child sex offenders, and the pandemic's socio-economic impact is increasing the risk of child sexual exploitation. As the world response to COVID-19 push factors that facilitate or lead to sexual abuse and exploitation of children are expected to intensify. We need to adopt a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, and child rights-centered approach if we hope to end impunity and duly protect all children, leaving no one behind. All partners need to address the rapidly changing situation and its devastating effects to ensure that child protection remains central to current and future responses, including for the travel and tourism sector's recovery. We must recognize that this recovery period for the tourism industry is an opportunity to build healthy and resilient tourism that keep children safe from harm, leaving no child behind. We must also empower children to be part of the solution and ensure that their views and experiences shape our response in a meaningful and ethical way. I look forward to continuing my collaboration with all stakeholders, including children and young people, international organizations, governments, civil society, the private sector, as well as our hosts, ECPAT USA and International, the US Department of Homeland Security, and Marriott Hotels International. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Dr. Majid, for this powerful start to our panel, highlighting the challenges of a crime that has no borders, thrives on the anonymity of its perpetrators, and is a crime that is vastly underreported and under-prosecuted, a situation only exacerbated by increased vulnerabilities brought on by COVID. Dr. Majid has challenged us all as travel and tourism restart. Empowering children to become healthy and resilient is a necessary component of prevention of child exploitation. Before we begin the conversation with our extremely esteemed and knowledgeable panelists, we're going to start with a short quiz. First quiz is 185 UN member states have signed the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, which by international law obligates them to adhere to its provisions. Under the protocol, children under 18 are not protected if, and this is the quiz, 1, they consent to being recruited for acts of sexual exploitation. 2, they receive payment for any act of sexual exploitation. 3, they are not physically harmed. 4, they are not transported to another location or country. Or 5, they maintain that they are over 18 years of age. We'll give everyone one moment to answer the question, and then I will provide the answers. All right, thank you for sharing the poll results. And it looks like there's very clearly the last point. So the answer is actually none of the above. Trafficking of a child under the age of 18 is a crime. There are no extenuating circumstances, even if the child maintains that they're over 18 years of age. Further, recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of children by any person is a crime. Now I'd like to turn to our panelists. Since 1990, ECPAT International has expanded to 122 affiliates in 104 countries. Its mission to end the sexual exploitation of children has three principal components: research, which is widely employed as a basis for developing more informed policies and advocacy to protect children; prevention of these crimes by partnering with law enforcement, the private sector, and governments; and awareness, increasing public support to hold governments accountable to enact and implement laws establishing the right of every child to live a life free from sexual exploitation. In 2016, ECPAT International launched a global study on sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. Here to speak with us about some of the findings of that research, which included 67 partners, experts, and children, is Dr. Dorothea Czarnecki, Acting Executive Director of ECPAT International. Welcome, Doro.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Thanks also extremely for organizing this important event and for the constant good cooperation that we have with ECPAT USA and partners, of course. I was very grateful to see the message from Najat as UN Special Representative, as Najat was a very important contributor to some of the milestones. And you just mentioned the global study on sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism as the first of its kind in 2016. We followed this up in 2018 with the first global summit held in Bogota, Colombia, with support of the Colombian government there. And ever since then, we've made progress, but we know that so much more needs to be done in order to make sure that children will not be left behind also in the hopefully soon post-COVID recovery. So for today, very briefly, I brought you three major points that I would like to raise. The first thing that is important to mention and to work on from the ECPAT perspective are policies and laws. So we see that, of course, it starts with the willingness and the engagement and the understanding of governments to improve and enforce the legal and policy frameworks in order to keep children safe from sexual exploitation in also online and offline environments. Najat mentioned already live streaming as one of the possibility, this sounds too positive, no? Or one of the manifestations of exploitations and of the modus operandi of offenders. Online grooming, we saw last year many confirmation from Interpol and Europol saying that in the high prime time of the pandemic, as the whole world was in lockdown, basically, offenders just did not stop in exchanging tips and recommendations among each other and in approaching children also abroad as well as domestically for possible offline offense as soon as travel can be resumed again. It has been mentioned already that this is a crime that has no borders, and it sounds a bit like a cliche, but it's so very true still in our globalized world, and some countries do not recognize this fact that it still should stay a crime when you travel as a child sex offender from one country to another in order to exploit children there. ECPAT has published on its website so-called global progress indicators. And this is a very useful tool also for you to take a look to see where do we stand globally on this. And you will see on one indicator on the status quo globally on extraterritorial provisions and extradition provisions of crimes of children when it comes to this context. Another thing that is very much related also to a lack of sufficient legal protection is the gender dimension of sexual exploitation, also in travel and tourism context. We see that still to this day, boys are sometimes very invisible in service provisions, in legislations, as well as children with diverse sexual orientation. Of course, all children and every child can fall victim to those crimes of offenders. And it is very like a strong recommendation for me also to take a look at the ECPAT website, where you'll find our first research specifically tackling the sexual exploitation of boys as a topic with the example, it's a country report of Thailand, where you can see very strong recommendations, mainly also focused on the adjustment of support provisions of services to boys and SOGI children. The second point is the risk analysis. So again, with our global progress indicators as a tool, this will help to see on a virtual map that only a limited number of countries have really established obligatory government regulated child protection standards for the travel and tourism industry. I'm very pleased to say, because Latin America is very close to my heart, that the Latin American region is one of the most advanced regions when it comes to this. In this respect, there are many, historically, many national codes of child protection in travel and tourism, with a number of businesses as members also of decode.org, the internationally recognized child protection code. We believe that companies need also better tools to analyze specific risks and impacts on children related to sexual exploitation as one of the risks for the industry, also among the Global Sustainable Tourism Council destination criteria, for instance. We will soon be launching a risk analysis template that can be used also for smaller companies with limited human resources to identify and assess those risks in relation to protection from all forms of exploitation. And the third point is focused on the so-called volunteer tourism or voluntourism. We see from ECPAT's side that also a limited number of countries only have legislation in place which would require background checks of those volunteers coming to those countries, sometimes with good intentions that can go wrong, sometimes already with bad intentions, unfortunately. But this is often not applicable neither for nationals nor internationals coming and applying for work directly with children, including also consultants, volunteers, staff, and so on. So also we want to help the industry and be as practical as possible and support the development of responsible and safe forms of travel and tourism. So ECPAT and the Code together also developed a voluntourism policy that involves excluding visits specifically to orphanages from standard tourism packages, as it drives institutionalization, which can cause harm to children, among other harms. We see that protecting children, of course, is fundamental to many partners with whom ECPAT International cooperates. We would like to mention specifically the World Travel and Tourism Council, who included child protection in its sustainability agenda. I would like to mention the Mekong Delta, Destination Mekong, established a child protection expert group and supports this topic on its agenda. This is a very recent development from this year. And we have, again, Latin America with the Regional Action Group for the Americas in short GARA. It focuses very effectively on the prevention of sexual exploitation of children in the region, and also SIVAC is the South Asian initiative to end violence against children in South Asia that also prioritizes child protection in its agenda. What we are missing a little bit in this setting is an interinstitutional effort guided by the UNWTO as one of the key actors in this process of child protection. So we would really like to see child protection mainstreamed in the UNWTO policies and programs. And this could and should include, of course, also civil society actors to transform the current and upcoming tourism developments in respect also and in connection with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with child protection in focus. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take two. A year and a half into the pandemic, and I'm still forgetting to unmute. I want to thank you, Doro, for sharing that extremely comprehensive information. ECPAT International has been doing pioneering work in the field of child protection, even as the situation evolves so rapidly under COVID. And it is just such an honor for ECPAT USA to be part of this global network and working so closely with ECPAT International. So many thanks. In May of 2019, the Economist Intelligence Unit, a world leader in providing business sustainability information, published Out of the Shadows, shining light on the response to child sexual abuse and exploitation, a 60-country benchmarking index examining how countries, including the United States, are responding to the threat of sexual violence against children. The 60 countries included comprise 85% of the world's children. The report explores the environment in which the issue occurs and is addressed, the degree to which a country's legal framework provide protections for children from sexual violence, whether government commitment and capacity is being deployed to equip institutions and personnel to respond appropriately, and the engagement of industry, civil society, and media in efforts to tackle the problem. 3 ECPAT USA partners, Carlson Family Foundations, the Oak Foundation, and the World Childhood Foundation, were supporters of this project. I'm happy to say the United States did score near the top according to the EIU report in acknowledging the problem of child sex abuse and exploitation and providing protection. And I'm going to make available to everyone, I just sent out the link to this critically important report. The United States government works vigorously on efforts to prevent and protect children from sexual exploitation. At the UN, it is a party to 2 legally binding optional protocols: the Convention on the Rights of the Children on the Sale of Children, Child Prostitution, and Child Pornography, and the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. The protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Working locally across federal agencies, with businesses, and in cooperation with other countries is to say, at the least, very challenging work. I am so grateful for the partnerships that we have. And in that context, I really would be delighted to welcome Edward Owens, the Deputy Special Agent in Charge at Homeland Security Investigations, New York. Thank you so much, Ed.
Good morning. Lori, it's such a pleasure to be able to participate with ECPAT and all of our partners in what we're doing as a nation and as an international scene to address the exploitation of not just children, but all vulnerable entities as well. I have here just a couple of points that I wanted to go over. I'm the Deputy Special Agent with Deputy Special Agent in Charge with Homeland Security Investigations. Just for those of you who may not be familiar with HSI, we are the largest investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, and we're responsible for investigating transnational crimes, threats, and all those criminal organizations that seek to exploit the U.S. and our citizens. We investigate, we disrupt, and we dismantle terrorist organizations, transnational criminal organizations, and anyone who really looks to make money and to make a profit off of the subjugation of others. In particular, from what we're talking about today in the area of exploitation, our investigations include human trafficking, labor trafficking, human smuggling, human rights and violations and war crimes, our child exploitation, female genital mutilation, and now sex tourism. One of the things that we really look at in the sex tourism aspect, as a lot of my colleagues have mentioned, is really trying to address the activities of U.S. citizens, both domestically and internationally. We want to make sure and we ensure that those people who travel to exploit children, even in foreign countries, are still able to be prosecuted here within the United States. So essentially, when we talk about exploitation, we look at a victim-centered and a violator-focused approach. On the investigative side, we want to make sure that all of our agents and law enforcement personnel, we bring to bear all of our resources. We look at a task force setting where we leverage federal and state partners, federal and state prosecutors. We want to make sure that each of these organizations that are making money at the expense of the vulnerable sector of our population, we want to make sure that we bring them to justice. But it doesn't just stop there. On top of that, we also have a victim-centered approach. Our victim assistance program is comprised of victim assistance specialists. There's one in every SAC office. We have 30 SAC offices across the country and attaché offices in foreign countries. That way we're enabled to have a global reach on how we address and how we attack the problem of human trafficking and sexual exploitation of children. In addition to our victim assistance specialists, we also have coordinators, and those are agents that are trained in this particular field with the specific knowledge on sensitivities and dealing with exploitation victims. We also have, in the recent past, incorporated forensic interview specialists in each one of our SAC offices throughout the country. On top of those real assets that we bring to the table, there's immigration relief, continued presence, T visas, U visas. These are all of the benefits, and these are all of the resources that we bring to the table to not only help the victims of human trafficking and exploitation, but to also support them, to embrace them and try to get them on their feet and help them on the path to continuing to thrive. And then on a national oversight, we have our Center for Countering Human Trafficking based out of Washington, D.C. This agency, right, or this group here is exactly what we're doing here. It's a collaboration. It's the way that we all work together to address this issue. As you see in the middle of this last slide, our 4 Ps. How do we address exploitation? Prevention. And that's how we get out there and we educate the public. We educate the industry on what to look for, how to describe it, how to identify it. Little key points that you can see or that you can recognize as a layperson that may make you say, maybe I should call someone about this. We protect, and that's where the agents come in. That's where the investigations come into play. That's where we leverage all of our legal remedies to address those both domestically and internationally who are benefiting and who are exploiting our vulnerable society. And then we prosecute. Like I mentioned before, we leverage every legal remedy possible. It does not know a badge. It does not. It doesn't matter to us who has the ultimate statistic or arrest. We just want to make sure that those people are going to jail. And then the last part of that P, the last P in there, and this is one of the most important things, is partnering with entities like ECPAT, partnering with our hotel industry, our transportation industry, partnering with everyone that we can to really get the message out there. So that way we want to bring forward a one-face approach to the victims. That one-face approach should be, when folks are coming to you, when law enforcement, when the government, when we're coming to you with open arms. We're coming to you with the tools to really address the violators, but we're also coming to you with all the resources to help you continue to thrive. On this last splash screen, you have all of our contact information. Like I said, we have offices in every, and all across the United States and throughout the world. We also have links here to our Center for Countering Human Trafficking. You have the link there for the Blue campaign. These are all the different resources that we bring to bear. And each and every day, we look forward to continuing this work. We look forward to continuing the dialogue and really trying to put our best foot forward so that way we can address this problem together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. And as an attorney who, prior to joining ECPAT USA, represented many victims of human trafficking, and especially young victims, minors. I just want to express my gratitude. HSI New York has really led the field, and I can attest to the victim-centered approach that your office has really developed to such great impact. So thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience. After the 1996 First World Congress against the commercial sexual exploitation of children in Stockholm, ECPAT Sweden, in collaboration with Nordic tour operators, developed the Code of Conduct for the protection of children from commercial sexual exploitation in travel and tourism. And as Doro mentioned, today the code, while maintaining its close relationship to ECPAT International, is an independent international organization with thousands of supporting members worldwide from the travel and tourism sector. The Tourism Child Protection Code of Conduct, the code, which the link has been shared in the chat, is the world's first and only voluntary set of business principles travel and tour companies can implement to prevent sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. The code provides awareness, tools, and support to the travel and hospitality industry. Companies that endorse the code agree to 6 principles. First, they establish a policy and procedures against the sexual exploitation of children. Second, they train employees in children's rights, the prevention of sexual exploitation, and how to report suspected cases. Third, they include a clause in contracts throughout the value chain stating a common repudiation and zero tolerance policy of the sexual exploitation of children. Fourth, they provide information to travelers on children's rights, the prevention of sexual exploitation of children, and how to report suspected cases. 5, they support, collaborate, and engage stakeholders in the prevention of sexual exploitation of children. And 6, they report annually on their implementation of code-related activities. Our relationship with code members have expanded to far more partnerships than the actual code requires. And I am just so pleased to invite today a tremendous partner of ECPAT USA from Marriott International, Abbe Horswill, the Manager of Human Rights and Social Impact. Abbe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lori, for having us and for providing that great introduction. And really thank you to everyone on the call today for joining this important conversation. Marriott is so proud to have signed the code and really honored to have been recognized as a top member of the code for our work to integrate child protection practices into all aspects of our business and to really help lead the hospitality industry's efforts to eradicate child sexual exploitation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about one specific initiative that I think you'll quickly connect to implementing some of the criteria of the code in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to share a little bit of information about why this topic is so important to us at Marriott. One of our core company values is how we do business is just as important as the business we do. And we recognize that businesses like us play an increasingly important role in addressing some of our world's most pressing social, environmental, and economic issues, including child sexual exploitation. Marriott's sustainability and social impact platform, Serving 360, doing good in every direction, really is the guiding force behind our effort to create that positive and sustainable impact wherever we do business. One of the key pillars of that platform, or coordinates as we like to call them, is welcome all and advance human rights, which I think is very timely as we are preparing to recognize World Tourism Day and continue to engage in some really important discussions about how the travel and tourism industry can help protect children and uphold children's rights. Marriott's work in this coordinate really focuses on using travel as a catalyst for promoting peace and understanding and cultural experiences, creating a safe and welcoming world for everyone, and addressing some of the industry's most pressing and highest risk human and children's rights issues, including human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. Marriott became one of the first hospitality companies to really openly address and talk about human trafficking and publicly recognize that hotels can be unwilling venues for this horrific crime. Now, as we've kind of started to talk about today, it is really scary to recognize that tourism can essentially open the doors for child sexual exploitation and these other crimes. But we felt it's really important to address this because we want to live up to our core company values. And we've really implemented a number of initiatives that I think help us identify and prevent trafficking and exploitation. Back in 2011, Marriott worked with ECPAT USA to develop an internal training specifically on child sexual exploitation. In 2017, we made human trafficking awareness training required for all on-property associates at both managed and franchised properties. This was the first non-service oriented training to be required at that level globally, which I think really underscores Marriott's commitment to addressing this issue. Then most recently in 2020, we donated this training to ECPAT USA with support from the American Hotel and Lodging Association Foundation to make it available for free to the entire hospitality industry. So to date, more than 850,000 associates wearing the Marriott badge have taken the training, as well as another 500,000 hotel workers at other companies who have completed the training that's available open source through ECPAT USA's website. And honestly, we really couldn't be more excited about these milestones because we're essentially creating a global workforce that stands ready to recognize and respond to these issues. But at the same time, we also know that there's always more work to be done, and we are committed to continuously improving our efforts and really finding new ways to address these important industry issues. So earlier this year, we decided to update our human trafficking awareness training, even as the hospitality industry confronted some pretty unprecedented challenges as a result of the pandemic. But we made this decision for two main reasons. So first, over the past decade, I think that we as a field and we as a company have learned a lot about the most effective ways to train people on human trafficking. A lot of previous trainings have focused on the potential indicators of human trafficking, providing sort of those lists and check boxes. But I think we now understand that many of these warning signs are very nuanced and require some additional explanation to resonate with learners. In a series of focus groups, Marriott associates shared that they really needed some more context on these indicators, and managers said that they wanted some additional guidance to help them understand how to assess them and how to determine the appropriate response. And second, of course, the world has really changed significantly since we launched our original training in 2016. COVID-19 has ushered in more contactless and mobile hotel experiences, which of course have been invaluable in helping to minimize the spread of the virus, but have also really made it more difficult to spot some of those potential indicators of trafficking. So our new training incorporates aspects of what we call the higher tech and lower touch operating environment, and really tries to explain how associates can still recognize human trafficking, even in things like a mobile check-in interaction or amid evolving room cleaning protocols where housekeepers might not be entering guest rooms on a daily basis. So taking all of that into account, this new training really aims to build on the foundation of the original training and help associates more effectively recognize and then respond to these potential indicators. The new training consists of 3 separate modules with a couple of key updates. The training has separate learning paths for non-management associates and managers, so that associates are instructed to report potential trafficking situations to their managers, and then managers are provided with a lot of additional guidance to assess and report the situations and also possibly interact with potential victims. As you might have guessed, the training also has a lot more information, really focused on helping associates understand human trafficking and contextualize the indicators they might observe, but that also means the training is a lot longer. So for the associates, it's about 60 minutes, and for the managers, it's closer to 80 minutes, which of course really represents a pretty substantial increase from the previous 30-minute version. One thing that has been really important to me in this relaunch is that the training is also survivor informed. It was developed with meaningful input from survivors of trafficking at all stages of development to really help us ensure that our response to trafficking is trauma informed and victim centered, and that all of our resources, including the training, are survivor informed. Survivor consultants helped us draft the initial storyboards, and members of ECPAT USA's Survivors Council reviewed the training as built and provided some really valuable feedback. And then finally, the training consists of 4 scenarios that are based on actual calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline and incidents reported to Marriott's Global Safety and Security team, which I think are really important to help learners navigate frankly authentic situations and practice their decision-making skills in context. We use the same scenarios in both the associate and manager learning paths, but the perspective shifts. So an associate is observing the situation, but the manager is hearing different associates share what they've observed. So to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, I am going to play the beginning of one of those scenarios. And thanks in advance for your patience with me as I sort of bumble through this live screen sharing process here. All right, please feel free to give me a shout in the chat if you have any trouble hearing the audio here.
Now, let's look at a situation that might take place within a guest room. Seeing there isn't a do not disturb sign on the guest room door, A housekeeper knocks on the door and identifies themselves 3 times. After no response from the room, she enters the room to perform her cleaning tasks. She notices that the room is very messy. Women's clothing is strewn all over the floor, including several school uniforms and lots of lingerie. There are piles of towels on the floor next to the bed, far more towels than were originally included in the room. When she looks in the bathroom, she sees even more towels on the floor and notices a few have bloodstains on them. After gathering the dirty towels, the housekeeper sees 2 student identification cards on the floor. While she doesn't normally look at personal items in guest rooms, she is becoming concerned about some of the warning signs she has seen. She notices the identification cards include their birthdays. They are both 16 years old. On the nightstand and desk, there are large piles of cash. As the housekeeper is cleaning the desk, she notices an open laptop is displaying an online ad with pictures of females that look like the 2 girls she saw on the student identification cards. She looks in the trash can and sees empty condom boxes and a few small orange plastic caps. The housekeeper's mother has diabetes, and she recognizes the caps as tops to syringes. Suddenly, a female guest yells from the hallway. She is furious with the housekeeper for entering the room and asks her not to return for the duration of the stay.
All right. I am going to stop us there just in the interest of time. But a couple of things I just want to make sure to address before I pass the torch back to Lori. So first, I saw a great question in the chat about the training being available to the industry. So right now, it's that previous version of the training that's available that was initially developed in 2016. You can access it directly through ECPAT USA's website, and I believe that Lori will be sharing a link as she is next on the docket to present. We are very much in the process of donating this newer version of the training to ECPAT USA as well, and we hope that it will be available early next year, but I have no doubt that we'll be doing a lot of communications around that, so please stay tuned. The other piece I just want to address here is I love spoilers, so I have to tell you what happens in the rest of the scenario. First, you see that the housekeeper really immediately stops cleaning the room and reports the situation to her manager. Then in the manager module, you follow the same scenario, so you hear the housekeeper really relay the information to her manager and see that the manager is particularly concerned because she sees that strong evidence to suggest that there are child victims involved. So what she does is reach out immediately to the hotel's law enforcement contacts who are specially trained in human trafficking, and then follows Marriott's internal reporting procedures. So I hope that this demonstration, albeit brief, has given you some sense of some of the new features in our training and why we're so excited to be launching it and sharing it with the broader industry in the upcoming months. So with that, thank you again, Lori, so much for having us here today and letting us share a little bit about this training program and how we've implemented some of the criteria of the code. I hope for those of you listening that this has served as a good example of an initiative to promote awareness and strengthen capacity in the travel and tourism industry. And please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. So with that, back to you, Lori.
Thank you so much, Abby. I get so excited every time I see this training. I had an opportunity to get a sneak peek at it previously and just thought it was so great the way it's been adapted to reflect changes in technology and also the impact of COVID, that I'm just grateful that Marriott is going to be making this available to the world. And we have posted in the chat the current training, the 1.0 training that is available for free to anyone. It is on our website, and I hope you take it and stay tuned. Our hope is if things go as planned, we can make an announcement in January for National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So stay tuned for more. Connected with that, I just wanted to segue into some other important partnerships that ECPAT USA is doing. And I think what was so significant about the Marriott work is it's an example of private industry working with civil society organizations to create a product that helps everyone. Like it doesn't just take one sector. We all need to come together on this. And also survivor engagement, survivor informed practices are so critical. And so I do want to thank Marriott for including the ECPAT USA Survivors Council. And I want to thank our Survivors Council because ultimately your lived experience is really what drives our daily work to protect children. One thing that's interesting, and Abbe, if I can just correct you slightly, because you said 500,000 people took that free training. Actually, now we checked our data, it's closer to 600,000 people globally have taken the training. So there is just an enormous appetite for getting this information. What we noticed though is that businesses were struggling during the pandemic. They wanted information, but especially the travel, tourism, hospitality was hit such a hard blow that they really had limited resources. So the fact that this was made available for free was significant. ECPAT USA had developed previously a travel management training program as well for individuals who were involved in travel and tourism and arranging global events. And we wanted it to be more tailored to the travel management industry. We also had that available on our website for a fairly nominal fee, but what we noticed was that there was a significant drop last year because that industry was struggling so much. And so we spoke with one of our leading supporters and actually the first company in the United States to sign the code, Carlson Travel. And the Carlson Family Foundation agreed to support ECPAT USA in offering the travel management training also for free. Now, everyone on this call, this is sort of a little under the radar because actually we're not announcing it officially until Monday, but you are joining us. This is an exclusive group. And so I'm going to make available that training on our website, the website link here now. And I urge all of you to take a look at it. It is available in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And again, another example of the private sector, in this case, foundations working closely with us to support it. And also I want to thank the American Hotel and Lodging Association for their critical partnership in helping move all of this work forward. We are close to time. I saw that we had some additional questions. I just want to close, and then if people do want to stay on the line, we can answer a couple of the questions. World Tourism Day is celebrated each year since 1970 to spread awareness about the importance of tourism. The World Tourism Organization is the UN agency entrusted with the promotion of responsible, sustainable, and universally accessible tourism. It has a difficult task, as we have discussed today, and if there's time, Doro, we'd love to talk about some of ECPAT International's work in sort of assisting in raising awareness on this issue. In 1999, it approved a voluntary global code of ethics for tourism for its members, designed to minimize the negative impacts of tourism while maximizing the benefits for residents of tourism destinations. In 2011, it supplemented this with a private sector commitment to the Global Code of Ethics Tourism Pledge, where signatories report on implementation. Now the Global Code is open for ratification as a legally binding convention. Every effort when we work together to ensure children are safe from sexual exploitation and travel is important. So where will you go when you feel it's safe to travel? There had been a poll taken in 2019. Top destinations had been listed as #1 France, #2 Spain, #3 the United States, #4 China, and #5 Italy. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you and with our panelists as hopefully we see the pandemic subside to the level that global travel can again continue in a safe, ethical, and responsible way that protects children. I want to thank all of our panelists today for sharing your tremendous wisdom. I do hope people can stay on to ask some questions. I want to thank my colleagues at ECPAT USA and the Survivors Council for continuing to help advance the work that we're doing. And finally, I would like to thank ECPAT USA's UN committee, which continues to provide critical expertise. These are people who have deep involvement and knowledge about how to engage in a meaningful way with the UN community, and really were essential in bringing this presentation together. So with that, we will conclude the talk. We will stay on for a couple of minutes to answer questions. Thank you already, Abbe, for answering the question we saw about when will the training be available. I do want to ask, I think this question would be best for Doro. Are you seeing a correlation between domestic violence and emotional, physical, sexual, and human trafficking, especially for children?
Thank you very much. Very interesting question, actually. Not necessarily, but I might not be on the top of things in terms of new research. Of course, I mean, everyone knows that also the pandemic was highly difficult for families, obviously, in terms of emotional stress and domestic violence. This, yes, but as the factors of human trafficking and sexual exploitation are profit-driven, it doesn't necessarily need to have this correlation or any form of connection to domestic violence. But I mean, everything is connected somehow. So it is like the short answer also, if we talk about sex trafficking in the USA, of course, if you have domestic violence, runaway kids, teenagers, you know, that are on the streets actually and in sexual exploitation. So there is a linkage, obviously. But if we talk about the international crime of child trafficking, for instance, not necessarily there's like a whole package of factors involved in this, would be the very, very shortened answer.
Abbe, I'm curious if you had seen anything as you were doing your research, and also if HSI has received any information about any correlation between these areas.
Sure, I think I'm frankly probably not the best person to address this question, Lori, unfortunately, because our social impact and sustainability portfolio does not include domestic violence. So we focus sort of more on the issues that directly affect the hospitality industry. So the human trafficking, the sexual exploitation, and the forced labor piece, which certainly agree with the other panelists that of course, you know, we are seeing and sensing some increases amid the pandemic.
Hi, Lori. And also, so you know, I would agree with my colleagues that there is a tremendous interaction, right? So when we look at our vulnerable society, we look at the individuals that we come across that may have been trafficked domestically or internationally, right? Sometimes they come from broken homes. Sometimes they come from areas where they were abused. And this is true of juveniles or, you know, adults as well. So that's their escape out of a bad situation. And that's why, you know, I mentioned it's extremely important. We have a two-pronged effort here, right? We need to kind of help them get out of that, break that cycle. But we also have to educate the public, and not just know what to look for, but educate the public on supply and demand. I mean, we spoke a little bit about, how large-scale events will breed and bring, groups of human trafficking victims into an area, like a Super Bowl or, the Kentucky Derby or, a major concert. We have to also, and here in the U.S., address supply and demand. So where the demand exists, the transnational organizations will find that and build that supply, and oftentimes comprised of individuals that have been, exhibiting and who have been suffering from this abuse for many, 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 many years.
In order to learn more about the context of sexual exploitation, I just posted a link also in the chat. That is one of the novelties that ECPAT has. We've teamed up with the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, ICMEC, and developed an edX course that is free of charge, and on your own pace that you can enroll. So you get a lot of sessions, really good speakers from all around the world explaining the different facets and nuances also about starting with what really is violence against children, why it's important also for frontline workers, and this is from law enforcement, from social services and so on, to have a child-centered approach in order how to identify possible victims and so on. So also the topic of sexual exploitation in travel and tourism is one of the modules, but the rest is quite broad.
So thank you all. I mean, I mentioned I had represented trafficking victims. I know that for many of the clients that I served who had been exploited as children, there was significant domestic violence in their homes, and they grew up in a domestic violence a household that had domestic violence, and in some way that could almost serve as grooming them to be more vulnerable to exploitation. What's interesting is that in some cases you might see a household where there is domestic violence, but then sexual exploitation of the children and trafficking of the children is not occurring. I worked within a larger domestic violence organization, and there would be some households where the batterer was actually sort of superficially seen as a good parent because the batterer did not abuse the children. So I think it's certainly if there is domestic violence happening in a household, there should be some inquiry into the safety of the children. What's important to note is that even if the children are not being physically harmed by the abusive parent, the abusive partner for the adults, that can lead to preconditioning for later abuse. So I do think, I would say there is some correlation, although I think Doro documenting it might be difficult as it is for so much of what we see. Our moderator for our producer for the event reminded me that we did have a second quiz. And since we do have a little more time, I want to go ahead, since we all love quizzes, I do want to go ahead and share that quiz with people. And so can I ask that quiz be posted? So the question is, what should you do if you see a suspected case of child exploitation while traveling? Now, not everyone has had the benefit of seeing the amazing Marriott updated presentation slide deck, but hopefully, based on the conversation we've had today, we can come to some shared answer. So the first question is, 1, intervene immediately and remove the child from the situation. 2, if you're in the United States, call the human trafficking hotline to report what you see. 3, report what you see to the travel and tourism company's management. 4, post on social media what you saw. And 5, ignore the situation. So we'll just give you maybe 30 seconds or so to answer the poll, and then we'll show the answer. Okay, looks like the top answer is if you're in the United States, call the human trafficking hotline. And then the next answer is report what you see to travel and tourism companies management. So yes, those are both really good answers. So it depends on where you are. Either answer B or answer C would be correct. In the United States, there are actually two potential hotlines that would be relevant. So one, as mentioned in the question, is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is at 1-888-373-7888. And while I'm talking, I think we'll try to put that into the chat. Let me go ahead and stick that here. And then, the second option is also to call the National Center on Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. And that number, I will give this to you. So I just posted the human trafficking hotline, and now I'll go ahead and post the NCMEC hotline. So either one of these would be really significant sources for collecting the information, reporting information, sharing it with authorities who could investigate and take action. It is important to say you should also alert the management of the travel and tourism company that you're patronizing. And I think what we'll be seeing about the upcoming Marriott training is that Marriott recognized that there needed to be additional resources available to their managers. And so we're very excited that there is a recognition and an understanding that managers can play really significant roles in taking the steps to make sure that this is investigated in a safe way. And it's so urgent to mention, answer A is just dangerous. You should not attempt to intervene. If there is a child being abused, you could really put that child's life at risk. So please go to management. They are being trained on the proper protocol and the proper way to engage with law enforcement who really have expertise. Answer D is just not helpful to the child. It's actually another form of exploitation. Depending on what you post, it could even be illegal if you're posting child sexual abuse material. If there's a photo of a child that is sexually inappropriate, you could actually have your own liability for posting the information. So please don't post anything on social media. And answer E is wrong, because we're all responsible for doing something to protect children from exploitation. So I do see that we have a number of other questions that people are posting. One question, Ed, this is for Homeland Security. How does Homeland Security work to prevent pimps, Johns, who I'll say we call them the sex buyers, and other sex traffickers from exploiting children? And one thing Ed, before you answer the question, one thing that's interesting about this question, and I don't know if the attendee did this knowing what the law is, but actually people who buy sex from children actually are classified as sex buyers under US law. So it's important when we talk about sex trafficking, we understand that the buyers, which are fueling the demand for child exploitation, are also held accountable under US law. So I want to thank whoever posted, it's an anonymous question. I want to thank you for posting it that way. And Ed, I'm hoping you can tell us, what is Homeland Security doing to stop these perpetrators?
Right, that's a great question. And there was another question also that was similar, and it asked about following the money. And that's with Homeland Security, we're taking an all-around multi-pronged approach, identifying the individuals and the organizations that are actually sponsoring, that are hosting, just like with any criminal activity, the whole purpose behind it is to make money. And unfortunately, unlike a kilo of cocaine or weapons where you sell them once and that's it, you make your money off of it. These transnational organizations are diversifying, and human trafficking is a very lucrative business. So looking at that, we do that holistic approach. We go after the individuals, but we also go after the organization. We go after the financing. We go after the assets. Because this is how we disrupt the organization. And that organization, when I mentioned transnational criminal organization, there's domestic and international side of the house. We loop in our international partners. So we identify the people who are starting it from overseas, the people who are promulgating it here in the United States. And we rely on a lot of information sharing. We rely on the eyes and ears of the public to, when you see something, say something, because that's how we get into it. We use all of our investigative resources, surveillance techniques. We're following the money, we're doing subpoenas, we're getting their bank records, phone records, all of those multi-pronged approaches that you see on CSI or these TV shows. But it's real life, right? This is what we're doing to identify not just that one person, because that one person that you see that may have the girl in the hotel room, he's more than likely connected to a larger organization. And that's what we go. We start there and we go to really identify the entire organization.
Thank you. That's an extremely helpful answer. And again, we're so grateful for the work that Homeland Security is doing to hold perpetrators accountable. We have another question. Are professional organizing conferences aware of this issue? And do they have ways to determine which hotels or venues to select? In other words, is there a rating that is published? Doro, I don't know if you want to answer this and talk a little bit more about the work with the code that both ECPAT International and ECPAT USA are doing.
Exactly. You will find under the code.org the website where you see the members of the code, meaning the businesses, and among other hotels mainly, who have implemented the child protection code in its fullest, to report annually, to improve and make plans for action every year in terms of sensitization, of training, like the one that we just heard from Abbe, and so on. So you will find those ones there listed where you can be pretty sure that they are aware of the topic, that they take measures against sexual exploitation of children and tourism.
Thank you. I just want to mention ECPAT USA has worked very closely with event organizers to keep this on people's radar. Recently, our director of private sector engagement attended a conference that Marriott's Global Events hosted, and we shared information about the code, about child protection, about the need to work with partners in the code. And a nice touch from that event was that Marriott's Global Events did a notebook project where Marriott's staff and members and associates signed notebooks that ECPAT USA then uses in our educational process. Our program, we work with children and underserved communities, children who come from communities where there is an elevated risk of trafficking in person, and the Marriott's team put together these really lovely notebooks. And so I think engaging the private sector in different ways, and making it real, making it tangible, having a message that you can share with these children is just another meaningful way. And if other organizations are interested in doing that work, please feel free to reach out to us about that. We perhaps have time. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of sort of thinking across divisions, thinking about bringing in the various partners in this. ECPAT USA is working with a broad coalition of US-based anti-trafficking organizations on looking at the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. So this is a federal act that criminalizes trafficking, but also provides certain benefits for victims. And Ed mentioned some of the immigration benefits in his presentation. One thing we're looking at is the reauthorization now is including provisions where the federal government will now use hotels that actually have adopted trainings and best practices that prevent trafficking from occurring on their premises. And so it's a way to incentivize. And in that, part of this is there's a discussion about creating a list for the federal government so that there is an acknowledgement of hotels that adopt best practices, hotels that proactively work with their staff to eliminate trafficking, to prevent trafficking, to discourage trafficking, to say this is not a good business practice. Those hotels will receive federal travel dollars, which for the hotel industry is quite significant. So there are lists out there, and I encourage people to go to the code.org to take a look at some of the information that is available on this. I think
Lori, if I could just quickly add something to this question, because I think that we are seeing this across the board at Marriott, not just from organizations that are putting together events and conferences, but really pretty large scale from investors, large customers, and even individual guests who are reaching out and asking, what we're doing about this issue, because they want to work with a company that cares. So, another resource that we often point people to is our modern slavery statement for companies that do a certain amount of business in the UK or Australia and are subject to their modern slavery laws. They are required to publish an annual statement explaining what they're doing to eradicate human trafficking in their business and supply chain. So it's a great resource if you're looking to learn more about what the company is doing, not just sort of a travel and tourism company that might be a member of the code, but even more broadly, any sort of large company that's doing business globally will have that statement, and it will be available on their website as well. So you can read that publicly accessible resource.
Yeah, thank you, Abbe. It's so important. I had the opportunity, actually while I was with you, I had the opportunity to speak with Chip Rogers, who's the CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And one of the things he emphasizes is that it's not just the right thing to do to engage in child protection, but it's just smart business strategy. And I think the kinds of questions that investors are asking indicates that it is smart business. And we at ECPAT USA certainly support when best business practices completely align with child protection practices. That's the direction that we all want to be going in. We are really close to time. I see there is a very important question about following the money, which is such a great question. And also, it is the topic of a whole separate webinar, which maybe I can speak with all of you about following the money in a webinar at another time. We do have a blog link on the ECPAT USA website specifically about this issue. And I would ask that the Zoom moderator put that information, put the link on the chat here for everyone to see. But again, I do want to thank everyone. I want to thank people for the really thoughtful questions and all of you for the answers. And I'm not going to repeat all my thank yous, but I do have tremendous gratitude for everyone who put together this event. And, wishing you a really wonderful and exciting and safe World Tourism Day. Thank you all so much.